The ancient pickup truck rattled to a stop outside Thornhill Auction House, its faded blue paint and rusted edges a stark contrast to the gleaming luxury vehicles lining the circular drive. Harlan Wheeler sat motionless behind the wheel for a moment, weathered hands still gripping the worn steering wheel, as his steel-gray eyes surveyed the imposing building before him. The evening sun cast long shadows across his leathery face, deepening the lines etched by 60 years of hard work and unforgiving elements. He adjusted his dust-covered cowboy hat, a faithful companion that had sheltered him through decades of scorching summers and bitter winters. Its once crisp brim now curved with character, telling stories his lips rarely shared. With deliberate movements, he stepped out of the truck, his mud-stained jeans and faded plaid shirt immediately marking him as an outsider in this world of opulence. The gravel crunched beneath his worn boots as he made his way toward the entrance, each step leaving faint, dusty imprints that seemed to announce his otherness. Through the grand glass doors, he could see the wealthy elite of the horse-breeding world mingling in their tailored suits and designer Western wear, glasses of champagne catching the light from crystal chandeliers overhead. Harlan paused, calloused fingers brushing against the auction catalog folded in his pocket. For a brief moment, something flickered across his weathered features, not hesitation, but a quiet resolve that had carried him through far more daunting challenges than facing a room full of privileged strangers. The moment he pushed through those heavy doors, the effect was immediate. Conversation died mid-sentence. The gentle hum of prestigious small talk evaporated into a thick silence that hung in the air like morning fog over pasture land. Heads turned, eyebrows raised, and lips pressed into thin lines of disapproval. Harlan moved across the polished marble floor, each step echoing in the sudden quiet. His boots left faint traces of honest dirt, physical reminders of a world these people paid others to manage, but never touched themselves. Whispers followed in his wake, growing just loud enough for fragments to reach his ears. Who let him in, and must be lost, and probably works for one of the farms. He didn't slow his pace, or acknowledge the stares that tracked his movement across the room. His eyes, sharp despite his years, remained fixed ahead, taking in the auction setup, noting the arrangement of seats, marking the location of the auctioneer's podium. While they saw only his mud-stained jeans and weathered hat, Harlan was calculating, assessing, planning, just as he had done his entire life on land that forgave nothing and rewarded careful observation. The elite of the horse-breeding world had already judged him and found him wanting. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would shake the very foundation of their carefully constructed hierarchy. The Thornhill Auction House stood as a monument to wealth and privilege, its interior meticulously designed to make those of status feel at home and those without it feel unwelcome. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, casting prismatic light across polished mahogany furnishings and imported marble floors. The air itself seemed different here, perfumed with expensive cologne, vintage whiskey, and the unmistakable scent of money that had existed for generations. Harlan moved through this foreign territory like a coyote among house pets. His worn boots left faint dust marks on the immaculate floor, each step a quiet rebellion against the sterility of manufactured perfection. The wealthy patrons, draped in designer Western wear that had never seen a day of actual ranch work, tracked his movement with barely concealed disdain. Their custom belt buckles gleamed with precious metals, some larger than a man's hand, worn not as tools, but as trophies. Their alligator boots, polished to a mirror shine, had never stepped in anything more challenging than the occasional puddle between their luxury vehicles and covered walkways. A woman in a tailored blazer with turquoise accents clutched her auction paddle closer to her chest as Harlan passed, as if his proximity might somehow contaminate her chances of success. Her companion, a silver-haired man with a carefully cultivated tan, whispered something that produced quiet laughter from their circle, their eyes never leaving the weathered rancher who dared to infiltrate their sanctuary. The auction staff moved with increasing nervousness, their practiced smiles faltering as they exchanged worried glances across the room. A young woman at the registration desk fidgeted with her tablet, eyes darting between Harlan and her supervisor, silently questioning whether they should intervene. The floor manager, dressed in a suit worth more than 3 months of Harlan's mortgage payments, hovered at the edge of the crowd, watching the intruder with the wary attention of someone monitoring a potential security threat. In the front rows, where the serious buyers always gathered, a group of established breeders made no attempt to hide their amusement. One man with a championship ring on his manicured finger pointed openly, his shoulders shaking with laughter as he commented to his associates. Another pretended to dust off his sleeve after Harlan walked past, triggering appreciative chuckles from those around him. Yet throughout it all, Harlan's expression remained unchanged. His weathered face a mask of dignified indifference. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, not the smirks, not the whispers, not the theatrical display of superiority that surrounded him. He had spent his life reading the subtle signs of approaching storms, of sickness in livestock, of strength in bloodlines. These people, with their expensive clothes and rehearsed manners, were far easier to read than an unpredictable mare or threatening sky. Their judgment washed over him like rain off a well-worn hat, noticed, but ultimately inconsequential. The auction catalog lay open in Harlan's weathered hands, its glossy pages a stark contrast to his calloused fingers. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind meant to convey value before a single word was read. But Harlan wasn't interested in the quality of the paper. His attention was fixed solely on the centerpiece, listing that had drawn whispers throughout the hall all evening. Lot 37, Midnight Dynasty. The stallion's photograph dominated an entire page, the photographer having captured the precise moment when power and grace existed in perfect balance. Midnight Dynasty stood 17 hands high, his coat blacker than a moonless night, gleaming under studio lights like polished onyx. Every muscle was defined, every line of his form a testament to generations of careful breeding. His neck arched with natural pride, his chest deep and powerful, his legs showing the strong bone structure that promised both speed and endurance. The description beneath the photograph detailed a bloodline that read like racing royalty. His sire, a Kentucky Derby winner. His dam descended from Secretariat himself. 3 generations of Triple Crown connections flowed through those powerful veins, each carefully listed with championship records and stud fees that had climbed into the millions. Notes from veterinary examinations confirmed perfect conformation, exceptional lung capacity, and the temperament that separated truly great horses from merely good ones. In a side room, visible through glass partitions, attendants prepared Midnight Dynasty for his appearance. Even from a distance, the stallion's presence was undeniable. He moved with controlled energy, power contained but never diminished. When he tossed his head, the motion rippled down his muscular neck like a wave through deep water. His coat caught the light, not with the artificial shine of show products, but with the healthy gleam that spoke of proper care and superior genetics. Harlan stood quietly at the back of the hall, his stance relaxed but attentive. Unlike the other potential buyers who flitted between social obligations and business conversations, he remained focused solely on the stallion. His weathered eyes tracked every movement, every shift of weight, every flick of the ear that might reveal something about the horse's character. He watched how the animal responded to handlers, noting the subtle interplay of cooperation and resistance that told more about a horse's intelligence than any documented test could reveal. A couple nearby shifted uncomfortably under the intensity of Harlan's unwavering attention, misinterpreting his focus as something threatening or unstable. They whispered to each other, casting sideways glances at the dusty intruder whose gaze never wavered from the prize stallion. But their discomfort went unnoticed by Harlan. In this moment, only two beings existed in his world, himself and Midnight Dynasty. Between them stretched an invisible thread of recognition, as if the blood of champions could sense when it was truly seen, truly understood by eyes that had spent a lifetime reading the silent language of extraordinary horses. The heavy approach of deliberate footsteps broke the delicate bubble of observation Harlan had built around himself. A broad-shouldered security guard materialized beside him. His tailored suit stretched tight across an imposing frame. The guard stood unnecessarily close, employing the silent intimidation tactics that had likely served him well with intoxicated party guests and overzealous fans at other venues. His clean-shaven face was professionally neutral, but his eyes performed a rapid assessment of Harlan's mud-stained jeans, worn flannel shirt, and dust-covered boots, finding each element wanting. The guard cleared his throat, the sound precise and practiced. His voice emerged with practiced authority, each word carrying the unmistakable weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. This was a private event, he explained, restricted to registered buyers with proper credentials. The emphasis he placed on registered and proper might as well have been a physical gesture toward the door. Several nearby auction attendees paused their conversations, turning slightly to observe the confrontation while pretending not to. A woman in an expensive turquoise blazer adjusted her position to get a better view, her auction paddle tapping an impatient rhythm against her palm. A silver-haired man in hand-tooled boots leaned toward his companion, whispering something that produced a poorly concealed smirk. The security guard waited for the expected response, the nervous fumbling for non-existent documentation, the stammered excuses, or the hasty retreat that typically followed such challenges. Instead, Harlan simply turned his weathered face toward the guard, meeting the younger man's gaze with calm, steel-gray eyes that had weathered far more imposing storms than this. Decades of facing down unpredictable bulls, negotiating with stubborn bankers during drought years, and watching beloved animals struggle through difficult births had burned away any capacity for unnecessary fear. Seconds stretched into an uncomfortable silence. Harlan's expression remained unchanged. Not defiant, not angry, not pleading, just patient, as if he had all the time in the world. His stillness created its own form of authority, one earned through years rather than granted by uniform or position. He offered no defensive explanation, no hurried search through pockets for identification, no recognition that he might not belong exactly where he stood. The guard shifted his weight, his professional demeanor faltering slightly under the steady gaze. The small audience watching from the periphery grew more obvious in their attention, sensing the unexpected resistance in what should have been a routine removal. Some of the wealthy patrons exchanged glances, their expressions caught between amusement and discomfort at the unexpected disruption to their carefully orchestrated evening. In this momentary standoff, power had shifted in the subtlest of ways. The guard, accustomed to the immediate compliance of those who didn't belong, found himself unsure how to proceed against someone who neither acknowledged nor contested the accusation. Harlan, meanwhile, continued his silent assessment, not of the guard, but of the situation, calculating odds, measuring responses, and determining values just as he had done his entire life when faced with obstacles both human and natural. The standoff between Harlan and the security guard drew attention like a crack in fine china, impossible to ignore once noticed. From across the auction floor, a slender man with a wireless earpiece and the unmistakable vigilance of someone in charge cut through the crowd with practiced efficiency. The head of security arrived at the scene with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations without creating scenes that might disrupt the evening's profitability. His appearance was meticulously crafted. Charcoal suit, tailored to disguise the weapon holstered at his side, tie pin doubling as a communication device, shoes polished to a military shine. He assessed the situation with a single sweep of experienced eyes, noting Harlan's worn clothing, unwavering stance, and the growing interest from nearby auction attendees. High-end events like this one survived on exclusivity, and exclusivity required enforcement. The head of security positioned himself precisely, close enough to establish control, but far enough to avoid creating a spectacle. His voice emerged low and measured, the practiced tone of someone who preferred compliance without confrontation. He explained the requirements for participation, proper registration, and verified proof of funds. Without these credentials, Harlan would need to leave. The statement hung in the air, not quite a threat, but certainly more than a suggestion. A small crowd had gathered now, their champagne glasses suspended midway to lips, their conversations paused. The wealthy patrons watched with the detached interest of people accustomed to being entertained by the misfortunes of others. A woman in diamonds worth more than most family homes tilted her head slightly, anticipating the removal of this dusty anomaly from their pristine environment. For the first time since entering the auction house, Harlan broke his silence. His voice emerged low and gravelly, weathered by years of early mornings, calling livestock, and late nights negotiating with the elements. The sound carried the texture of gravel roads and the depth of well water, natural, unrefined, but undeniably substantial. 5 simple words emerged, each one solid as a fence post driven into hard ground. He was here to bid, and that was all they needed to know. The quiet confidence in those words created a ripple through the gathered observers. It wasn't the desperate insistence of someone trying to belong, nor was it the aggressive defiance of someone spoiling for confrontation. It was the straightforward declaration of a man stating a simple truth, as immovable as the mountains that had shadowed his ranch for decades. The security team exchanged uncertain glances, their practiced protocol suddenly inadequate. The head of security measured Harlan again, reading something in the old rancher's steady gaze that prompted a subtle recalculation. With a nearly imperceptible nod, he stepped back, though his posture made it clear that the reprieve was temporary at best. Harlan returned to studying his auction catalog, seemingly oblivious to the stir he had created. But around him, something had shifted. The security staff positioned themselves strategically, ensuring the stranger remained in their sightlines. And among the wealthy patrons, whispers circulated, curious speculation about this weathered intruder who had somehow earned himself a stay of judgment, however brief it might prove to be. The commotion at the back of the hall drew attention like blood in water. Maxwell Thornton, deep in conversation with a group of admiring associates, paused mid-sentence as his finely tuned awareness of the room detected the disturbance. His manicured hand remained suspended in the air, a custom gold signet ring catching the light as he turned his head toward the source of the disruption. The owner of Thornton Racing Stables, winner of 3 Kentucky Derbies in the last decade alone, did not appreciate unexpected interruptions at events where he considered himself the unofficial host. Thornton cut an imposing figure in his perfectly tailored Western suit, the subtle texture of the fabric visible only up close, revealing its astronomical price to those who understood such things. His custom ostrich leather boots had been handcrafted in a small workshop in Milan. The exotic leather dyed the exact shade of mahogany that complemented his belt and watch strap. At 52, his face carried the confident lines of a man accustomed to success, his silver-streaked hair styled with deliberate casualness that required an hour of his personal barber's time each morning. He excused himself from his circle with practiced charm, his movements fluid and deliberate as he crossed the auction floor. Those in his path parted without hesitation, a sea of wealth and influence, giving way to greater wealth and greater influence. Thornton's eyes narrowed slightly As he identified the source of the disturbance, the security team's unusual formation around a figure who immediately registered as foreign to this environment, Harlan stood out like a weed in a manicured garden. His weathered jeans and dusty boots represented everything Thornton had spent a lifetime distancing himself from: hard labor, modest means, the unrefined reality of actual ranch work. Thornton had built an empire on the backs of horses without ever having to muck a stall or break a sweat under the unforgiving sun. His connection to the land existed only through property deeds and profit margins. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to unmistakable contempt as he approached, taking in every detail of Harlan's appearance with the critical eye of someone who judged books exclusively by their covers. The worn flannel, the calloused hands, the weathered skin that spoke of decades under open skies, each element registered as a personal affront to the carefully curated exclusivity of the auction. With perfect timing, Thornton inserted himself into the tense tableau, his voice projected with the practiced volume of someone accustomed to being heard across Kentucky Derby winners' circles and corporate boardrooms alike. His words carried crisp amusement as he suggested that perhaps the old man had taken a wrong turn on his way to a cattle auction. The statement hung in the air for a moment before his entourage, who had materialized behind him, as if summoned, erupted into appreciative laughter. The sound rippled through the auction hall, drawing more attention. Thornton stood with the confident posture of a man who had never been challenged in spaces he considered his domain, his eyes fixed on Harlan with the casual cruelty of someone who had forgotten, or perhaps never learned, that true power rarely required public displays of dominance. To him, this dusty intruder was nothing more than an opportunity to entertain his associates and reinforce his position at the top of this carefully structured hierarchy. The first strike of the auctioneer's gavel brought the room to attention, conversations fading into anticipatory silence. The man behind the podium was a professional in every sense, his voice a practiced instrument that could sustain the rapid-fire delivery for hours without faltering. His eyes missed nothing, trained to catch the subtlest movements that might indicate a bid from across the crowded room. The auction began with lesser lots, though lesser at Thornhill meant yearlings valued well into 5 figures. A bay filly with promising bloodlines opened the bidding, her price climbing steadily as paddles rose throughout the room. Within minutes, she changed hands for $80,000. The transaction recorded with brisk efficiency before the next lot was led into the display area. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision: introduction, opening bid, the hypnotic cadence of increasing numbers, then the sharp crack of the gavel sealing each deal. Harlan remained motionless at the back of the hall, his bidding paddle resting unused at his side. His weathered face revealed nothing as horses, with impeccable breeding documentation, paraded before the wealthy crowd, their values announced in sums that could purchase entire working ranches in less prestigious counties. His stillness only reinforced what everyone already believed, that he was a spectator who had somehow slipped past security, an outsider who could only observe as real money changed hands. Maxwell Thornton occupied the opposite end of the spectrum, his confident bidding on full display from his prime position in the front row. He raised his paddle with casual authority, sometimes barely lifting it above shoulder height, knowing the auctioneer would never miss his signals. For some lots, a single nod from Thornton was enough to discourage competing bids, his reputation as an aggressive buyer preceding him. He acquired a promising chestnut colt from a championship sire for a sum that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd, then added 2 broodmares to his collection without significant competition. Between acquisitions, Thornton made a point of glancing toward the back of the room, his eyes finding Harlan with dismissive amusement. The silent message was clear: this was a game played by men with resources, not weather-beaten ranchers in dusty boots. Each purchase further cemented Thornton's status, while highlighting Harlan's apparent inability to participate. The contrast could not have been more stark, one man exercising his financial power with every casual lift of his paddle, the other standing as still as the oak beams supporting the auction house ceiling. As the auction progressed through its first hour, a pattern emerged among the attendees. They no longer turned to observe Harlan with obvious curiosity or disdain. Instead, he had faded into the background, becoming as irrelevant as the waitstaff circulating with champagne trays. Only Thornton maintained his occasional glances, as if requiring regular confirmation that the intruder remained in his place, present but powerless, watching but not participating, an observer rather than a player in this high-stakes theater of wealth and prestige. Harlan's expression never changed, his eyes moving between the horses and his catalog with measured assessment. If he noticed Thornton's continued attention or felt the weight of his implied superiority, he gave no indication. His calloused hands remained steady, his bidding paddle unused. But anyone watching closely enough might have noticed that his focus never wavered, his attention never drifted, even as horses beyond most people's means continued to parade before the assembled elite. The auctioneer announced a 15-minute intermission, his voice hoarse from an hour of continuous calling. The assembled buyers rose from their seats, stretching legs stiff from sitting on antique chairs worth more than most monthly mortgages. Conversations resumed with renewed energy, the wealthy patrons comparing notes on bloodlines and discussing the values exchanged with the casual air of people who had never worried about a bank balance in their lives. Harlan remained where he had stood throughout the first session, his only movement a slight shift of weight from one booted foot to the other. He seemed content to observe the room, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. As he surveyed the milling crowd, the security team had relaxed their vigilance somewhat, though occasional glances still tracked his position from various corners of the hall. The path from Maxwell Thornton's front row seat to Harlan's position at the back wall cleared mysteriously as the racing magnate moved through the crowd. Whether by design or instinct, the assembled elite sensed the approaching confrontation and created space for it to unfold. Thornton's entourage followed at a calculated distance, close enough to appreciate the entertainment, but far enough to avoid being directly associated with whatever was about to transpire. Thornton positioned himself deliberately, standing slightly too close to Harlan, invading the personal space that men of the land typically held sacred. His custom cologne, an exclusive blend created by a French perfumer at $1,200 per ounce, announced his presence before his words did. He projected his voice with the practiced volume of someone accustomed to being heard across winners' circles and boardrooms, ensuring that everyone within 20 feet could hear every syllable. The words flowed with practiced cruelty, wrapped in a veneer of false admiration for the old man's courage. The reference to mucking stalls drew immediate laughter from the gathering crowd, the kind of laughter that stemmed not from genuine amusement, but from the desire to align with power. Thornton paused, allowing the laughter to swell before delivering his follow-up about whether Harlan was lost or merely enjoying the air conditioning. The crowd's response grew louder, more confident now that they understood their role in this public humiliation. Throughout this performance, Harlan's expression remained unchanged. His steel-gray eyes met Thornton's directly, neither challenging nor submissive, simply present. His weathered face, lined with decades of sun and wind and hard decisions, revealed nothing of offense or anger. He stood as he had stood facing blizzards and droughts and bank foreclosures, solid, immovable, patient. He offered no retreat, no nervous shuffle of feet or lowering of gaze that might satisfy Thornton's desire for dominance. Nor did he engage, provide no heated response or indignant defense that might escalate the confrontation. This silent dignity seemed to infuriate Thornton more than any possible retort. The wealthy breeder's smile tightened at the edges, the carefully crafted amusement in his eyes hardening into something colder. His hands, manicured weekly by a specialist who catered exclusively to the elite, clenched slightly at his sides. The script he had imagined for this encounter had not included the possibility of being denied a reaction. In all his years of power plays and public displays of dominance, he had never faced the unique challenge presented by Harlan's quiet steadiness. The crowd's laughter faltered as the moment stretched beyond its expected conclusion, the atmosphere shifting from entertainment to uncomfortable witnessing. In this silent standoff, power was recalibrating in ways that left everyone slightly unsettled. The intermission ended with 3 sharp taps of the gavel, summoning buyers back to their seats with Pavlovian efficiency. The auctioneer took a final sip of water, clearing his throat as he shuffled the papers for the next segment. His voice, rejuvenated by the brief rest, filled the hall with renewed vigor as he announced the appearance of Midnight Dynasty, Lot 37, the crown jewel of the evening's offerings. The massive doors at the end of the display area swung open, and a collective intake of breath swept through the room. The black stallion emerged into the spotlights, his handler seeming almost incidental beside such magnificent presence. Midnight Dynasty moved with controlled power, each step revealing muscles that rippled beneath his gleaming coat like liquid steel beneath black silk. His neck arched naturally, proud and powerful, his tail carried high in a display of confidence that bordered on arrogance. The handler guided him to the center of the ring, but it was clear to everyone watching that the stallion allowed this guidance rather than requiring it. His dark eyes surveyed the crowd with an intelligence that seemed to assess each human present, measuring their worth rather than the other way around. When he tossed his head, the motion sent cascades of light dancing across his midnight coat, revealing subtle blue undertones in the depths of that perfect black. For the first time since the auction began, Harlan Wheeler moved. The shift was subtle, 2 steps forward from his position at the back wall, but in a room where he had maintained statue-like stillness for over an hour, the movement registered like a shout. His weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes never left the stallion, tracking every movement, every breath, every flick of an ear with the assessment of someone who understood horses at a level that went beyond bloodlines and racing times. The auctioneer allowed the moment to stretch, understanding instinctively that Midnight Dynasty deserved this reverence. Then, with a slight nod to acknowledge the significance of what was about to transpire, he opened the bidding at $100,000. The sum hung in the air, filtering through the crowd and eliminating casual interest immediately. This was no longer the realm of modest fortune or hobbyist breeders. This was the domain of serious players only. In the front row, Maxwell Thornton sat with practiced nonchalance, though the slight forward tilt of his body betrayed his intense interest. His fingers rested lightly on his bidding paddle, ready but not eager, displaying the casual confidence of someone accustomed to acquiring whatever he desired. Across the room, several other well-known breeders and investors shifted in their seats, calculating potential returns against the opening figure. From his new position, Harlan stood perfectly still once again, his bidding paddle held at his side, unused but present. The security team, noticing his movement, exchanged glances but remained at their posts. The head of security's eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the weathered rancher, something in the old man's focused attention, triggering a reassessment of earlier assumptions. As the auctioneer repeated the opening bid, scanning the room for the first response, Midnight Dynasty turned his head toward the back of the hall. For a brief moment, the stallion's dark eyes seemed to lock with Harlan's steel-gray gaze, an electric connection that passed unnoticed by most, but created a barely perceptible smile on the old rancher's weathered lips. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell with practiced precision, each number climbing higher as paddles lifted throughout the room. The opening bid of $100,000 was immediately challenged, the price jumping to $150,000 with a casual flick of a wrist from a Texas oil baron whose hobby was collecting championship bloodlines. Before the auctioneer could even acknowledge this bid, another paddle rose from the European contingent, 175, offered by a German industrialist whose racing stable had dominated the European circuit for the past decade. Maxwell Thornton sat in calculated stillness through the early exchanges, his paddle resting untouched on his knee until the bidding reached $325,000. Only then did he enter the fray, his paddle lifting with elegant efficiency to offer $350. His timing was strategic, allowing the lesser players to exhaust themselves before asserting his dominance. The subtle smile that played at the corner of his mouth revealed his confidence. This was a game he had mastered long ago. The bidding war had begun in earnest. Each raise met with another in rapid succession: 200, 250, 300,000. The numbers climbed with dizzying speed, paddles rising and falling across the room like birds in coordinated flight. With each escalation, the crowd of potential buyers thinned, some lowering their paddles with reluctant sighs, others with sharp gestures of frustration, as the stallion's price soared beyond their predetermined limits. As the price pushed beyond $425,000, only two serious contenders remained: Thornton and a silver-haired Kentucky racing magnate, whose family had been breeding champions since the Civil War. The two men exchanged brief glances across the room, each recognizing the other as the only worthy opponent in this high-stakes battle. Their bidding became more measured now, calculated moves in a chess game played with six-figure increments. From that moment, the pattern of bidding shifted perceptibly. Thornton responded to each challenge with immediate counters, never allowing momentum to build with his opponents. When the oil baron offered $375, Thornton's paddle rose before the auctioneer could complete his acknowledgement. At $400,000, the German industrialist hesitated, then slowly lowered his paddle, accepting defeat with a tight nod. The Kentucky magnate pushed to $450 with deliberate confidence, his weathered face betraying nothing of the strain such sums might place on even his considerable resources. The room held its collective breath, a tension bouncing between the two titans of the industry and the magnificent stallion who stood in the center ring, seemingly indifferent to the fortune being offered for his ownership. Thornton allowed the moment to stretch, the pause calculated to create maximum dramatic effect. Then, with a smug smile that conveyed absolute certainty, he raised his paddle and clearly stated his bid of $500,000. The figure hung in the air, its weight pressing down on the assembled crowd. The Kentucky magnate's hand tightened on his paddle, hovering indecisively for several seconds before slowly lowering to his lap. With that simple gesture, Maxwell Thornton became the presumptive new owner of Midnight Dynasty. The auctioneer, sensing victory, began the ritualistic count. 500,000 going once, his gavel raised high, eyes scanning the room for any last-minute challenges. His gaze passed over the various defeated bidders, over the spectators whose eyes had widened at the astronomical sum, and finally, almost as an afterthought, toward the back where Harlan Wheeler stood, his weathered face unreadable, his bidding paddle still held loosely at his side. The gavel hung suspended in midair, poised to crack down on the polished wood block and finalize the sale. Maxwell Thornton's lips had already begun to curl into the satisfied smile of a man accustomed to victory. 500,000 was a steep price, even for a stallion of Midnight Dynasty's caliber. But the prestige of ownership would be worth every dollar. The auctioneer drew breath to pronounce the final sold when a sound cut through the room like a blade through silk. The two words, spoken in a deep, gravelly voice that carried decades of weathering, seemed to physically halt time within the auction hall. Heads turned in unified disbelief toward the source of the interruption. Harlan Wheeler stood with the same calm dignity he had maintained throughout the evening. But now his right arm was raised, bidding paddle held aloft with the casual confidence of a man stating an obvious truth rather than offering a bid that had doubled the highest price. The silence that followed was absolute. Crystal champagne glasses froze midway to parted lips. Conversations died mid-syllable. Even the magnificent stallion in the center ring seemed to sense the shift, his ears pricking forward as he turned his powerful neck toward the back of the room where Harlan stood. 1 million. Maxwell Thornton's head snapped around with such force that his perfectly styled hair fell slightly out of place. The flush that rose from his collar to his hairline transformed his tanned complexion to a dangerous red, his carefully cultivated image of control shattering like thin ice beneath unexpected weight. His eyes widened with disbelief, locked onto Harlan with an intensity that would have intimidated most men. But the weathered rancher seemed impervious, his steel gaze steady as a mountain lake. Harlan's response came with the same unhurried certainty, neither louder nor more emphatic than before. $1 million. The repetition seemed to solidify the reality of what was happening, crystallizing the moment into something that could no longer be dismissed as misunderstanding or error. The bid was real. The dusty, weathered rancher in mud-stained jeans and a faded plaid shirt had just offered twice the amount that had silenced every wealthy breeder in the room. The auctioneer's professional composure faltered for perhaps the first time in his 30-year career. His mouth opened and closed twice before he found his voice, his practiced smoothness replaced by genuine uncertainty. He stumbled over his words, asking if he had heard correctly, requesting that Harlan repeat the bid, as if a second hearing might render the astronomical sum more believable. Throughout the hall, the elite of the horse-breeding world exchanged glances of confusion and disbelief. Many leaned forward in their seats, as if physical proximity might help them comprehend the inexplicable scene unfolding before them. Security personnel shifted uncomfortably, their earlier assessment of the intruder suddenly and dramatically invalidated. In the front row, Thornton's hand clenched around his bidding paddle with such force that his knuckles whitened, the veins on his wrist standing out in sharp relief against his tanned skin. His jaw worked silently, grinding expensive dental work as he struggled to process this impossible challenge to his authority. The carefully constructed narrative of the evening, his inevitable triumph, the addition of a prized stallion to his collection, the admiring acknowledgement of his peers, had been shattered by two simple words from a man he had publicly ridiculed. And still Harlan stood, paddle raised, expression unchanged, as steady and immovable as the ancient oak trees that had weathered countless storms on his distant ranch. The auctioneer's wooden podium creaked as he leaned forward, his eyes wide beneath silver-rimmed glasses. Frozen in disbelief, he stared at Harlan until the auction director, a thin man with a meticulously trimmed mustache and the perpetually worried expression of someone responsible for millions in transactions, broke from his position at the side of the hall. His patent leather shoes clicked rapidly across the polished floor as he closed the distance to where Harlan stood, moving with the urgent purpose of someone attempting to prevent disaster. The director's voice emerged tight and controlled. Years of handling delicate situations with the wealthy and powerful evident in every measured syllable. A bid of such magnitude required immediate verification of funds. His hand extended expectantly, the slight tremor in his fingers, the only indication of his certainty that this was some elaborate jest or the act of a deranged intruder who would now be removed with appropriate discretion. Without a word, without even changing his expression, Harlan reached into the inner pocket of his worn leather jacket. The movement was unhurried, as natural as a man who had all the time in the world and nothing to prove to anyone. His weathered fingers extracted a folded document, creased from being carried but otherwise pristine. He handed it to the director with the casual confidence of a man who knew exactly what the paper contained and what effect it would have. The director unfolded the document with the careful precision of someone handling potentially volatile material. His eyes scanned the letterhead first. One of the most prestigious private banks in the country, then moved methodically down to the content. The certified letter confirmed available funds, not just adequate for the current bid, but well beyond, with figures that caused the director's eyebrows to climb steadily toward his receding hairline. Color drained from the director's face as he read, then returned with greater intensity, transforming his complexion from shocked pale to flushed crimson in the space of seconds. He read the document a second time, then a third, as if repetition might somehow alter its contents. His eyes darted between the paper in his hands and the weathered rancher standing before him. The cognitive dissonance between Harlan's appearance and his apparent wealth creating almost physical discomfort. With visible reluctance, he refolded the letter and returned it to Harlan, who tucked it back into his jacket with the same unhurried movements. The director turned toward the auctioneer's podium, a slight nod communicating volumes between the two men who had worked together for decades. The auctioneer straightened, adjusted his tie, and cleared his throat before pronouncing the words that would reshape the evening entirely. The bid was accepted. In the front row, Maxwell Thornton remained rigidly still, a statue carved from fury and disbelief. His fingers had gone white around his bidding paddle, the expensive wood creaking under pressure that threatened to snap it in two. His eyes never left Harlan, burning with the intensity of a man unaccustomed to defeat and unprepared for public humiliation. The announcement detonated through the hall, like a silent explosion. The stunned silence lasted precisely 3 seconds before erupting into a cacophony of whispers that swelled rapidly into open exclamations. Wealthy patrons turned to each other, questions tumbling over assertions, theories forming and dissolving in the space of breaths. Who is he? How is this possible? Did you know? The confusion spread like wildfire, consuming the carefully maintained composure of people unaccustomed to surprises, especially surprises that challenged their understanding of social hierarchy. Through it all, Harlan's expression remained unchanged, his weathered face as impassive as the distant mountains that had witnessed his quiet labor for decades. Only the stallion seemed to share his calm, Midnight Dynasty's intelligent eyes fixed on the unexpected bidder with what almost appeared to be knowing recognition. The chaos following the accepted bid rippled through the auction house like waves after a stone dropped in still water, as the wealthy patrons exchanged theories and expressions of disbelief. An elderly man at the edge of the crowd slowly rose from his seat. His movements were deliberate, hampered by age and arthritis, but possessed of a determination that parted the confused throng before him. His lined face, tanned and weathered by decades in the sun, bore the unmistakable marks of a lifetime spent with horses. He approached Harlan with none of the hesitation or disdain shown by others that evening. Instead, he moved with purpose, squinting slightly as he drew near, studying the dust-covered rancher's features with increasing intensity. Sudden recognition transformed his expression, widening his rheumy eyes and parting his thin lips in genuine shock. The name escaped him in a voice cracked with age but carrying absolute certainty. Harlan Wheeler. Not just any rancher, but the Harlan Wheeler who had developed the Wheeler method. The revelation landed in the already destabilized room like a thunderbolt. The Wheeler method, the revolutionary breeding and training approach that had transformed thoroughbred genetics 3 decades earlier. The technique that had produced more champions per breeding pair than any system before or since. The approach that racing journals still referenced with reverence, that had changed how breeders worldwide thought about bloodline development and performance optimization. The elderly man's voice carried the reverent tone of someone who had witnessed greatness firsthand, who understood the significance of the figure before him when others had seen only worn boots and weathered skin. His announcement spread through the room with electric speed, those closest to him repeating the name to those behind them in widening circles of awareness. Harlan Wheeler, the legend who had vanished from public life so completely that younger breeders knew only his methods, not his face. the genius who had withdrawn from the racing world at the height of his influence, disappearing after the tragic death of his wife and daughter in an accident that had also claimed his prize stallion. The man whose retreat into obscurity had become as much a part of racing lore as his revolutionary techniques. Throughout the hall, expressions transformed as understanding dawned. Older breeders, who had once competed against Wheeler's stock, stared in disbelief, memories resurfacing of the quiet, unassuming man whose horses had dominated championships decades ago. Younger buyers and agents reached for their phones, fingers frantically searching racing databases to confirm what the name meant in this industry. Security personnel, who had been poised to remove him earlier, now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with one another and their superiors. The auction staff, professionals who prided themselves on recognizing everyone of importance in their world, exchanged looks of mortification at their failure to identify a figure of such significance. The elderly breeder reached out a gnarled hand toward Harlan, not to shake but simply to touch, as if contact might confirm this wasn't some shared hallucination. His voice had dropped lower now, audible only to those nearest, recounting how Wheeler's methods had saved his failing stable 30 years ago, how the techniques had transformed not just individual horses, but entire breeding programs worldwide. Harlan himself remained unchanged by the revelation, neither confirming nor denying his identity. His weathered face betrayed no pride in recognition, no satisfaction at the reversal of fortune. He simply nodded once to the elderly man, a gesture of acknowledgement between equals who had walked similar paths and understood truths that the younger generation had yet to learn. In the front row, Maxwell Thornton's expression hardened into something dangerous, recognition and fury warring across his features as he realized exactly who had humiliated him so thoroughly before his peers. The auctioneer's final crack of the gavel echoed through the transformed auction hall, officially concluding the sale of Midnight Dynasty to Harlan Wheeler for $1 million. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held the crowd in stunned silence. Like water finding new channels after a flood, the wealthy patrons began to move with fresh purpose, not away from Harlan as before, but toward him, drawn by the gravity of his newly revealed identity and the opportunities it might present. Men and women who had snickered at his mud-stained jeans now approached with outstretched hands and business cards, their faces arranged in smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Their voices dripped with sudden warmth as they introduced themselves, each one attempting to establish some connection, some shared acquaintance, or mutual interest that might bridge the gulf between their earlier disdain and their current desperation for association. A renowned Kentucky breeder claimed distant memory of meeting Wheeler at a Derby 20 years earlier. A California racing magnate suddenly recalled how influenced he had been by Wheeler's writings on bloodline development, each approach more transparent than the last, their shallow attempts at connection sliding off Harlan's weathered exterior, like rain off well-oiled leather. Through this parade of newfound admirers, Maxwell Thornton watched from a distance, his expensive whiskey untouched in a white-knuckled grip. The controlled fury in his expression kept others at a careful distance, creating an island of empty space around him in the crowded room. When the initial wave of opportunists had exhausted themselves, Thornton finally moved, cutting through the crowd with the dangerous grace of a predator. He positioned himself directly before Harlan, close enough that the contrast between his hand-tailored suit and the rancher's worn flannel created its own statement. The question emerged through barely controlled anger, demanding to know why Wheeler had hidden his identity, allowing himself to be mistaken for some nobody off the street. The accusation carried the unmistakable undercurrent of a man who felt he had been deliberately humiliated, set up for a public fall. Harlan's response came with the same unruffled calm he had maintained throughout the evening. His voice carried neither defensiveness nor triumph, as he stated the simple truth. He had never hidden anything. Thornton, and the others had simply never bothered to see past his boots. 4 decades of horse breeding had taught him that the most valuable traits often came disguised in plain packages, while flashy exteriors frequently masked mediocre substance. People, it seemed, were much the same. The words landed with precision, finding their mark with devastating accuracy. Thornton's face revealed the impact like a physical blow, his carefully constructed worldview visibly cracking beneath the weight of this uncomfortable truth. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he confronted the possibility that his own prejudice had robbed him, not just of the stallion he had coveted, but of potential knowledge, collaboration, and connection with a man whose expertise surpassed his own. The realization moved across his features in waves, anger giving way to discomfort, discomfort yielding to the first hints of genuine self-reflection. His mouth opened then closed without sound, words failing a man who had always known exactly what to say. With a single statement, Harlan had accomplished what no business rival or social superior had ever managed. He had rendered Maxwell Thornton speechless. As Thornton finally stepped away, the shift in power became complete. The man who had entered as an unwanted intruder now stood at the center of the auction house, not through any effort to claim attention, but through the simple, undeniable weight of who he had always been. Beneath the dust, behind the weathered skin, and regardless of who bothered to notice, the night air greeted Harlan with the clean scent of approaching rain as he led Midnight Dynasty from the auction house. The grand double doors swung shut behind them, sealing away the murmurs and lingering shock of the evening's events. Stars punctuated the dark sky above, silent witnesses to the moment when judgment had been overturned by truth. The magnificent stallion moved beside Harlan with a fluid grace that seemed almost impossible for a creature of such power, his hooves falling in perfect rhythm with the old rancher's steady stride. Unlike the nervous prancing and head-tossing he had displayed with the professional handlers inside, Midnight Dynasty now walked with calm assurance. His ears remained forward, alert but unworried. His powerful muscles relaxed rather than bunched with tension. To anyone watching, the contrast would have been startling. This was not the same high-strung champion who had been paraded before potential buyers. A young stable hand, assigned to assist with loading the valuable horse, observed this transformation with undisguised wonder. The boy had spent the evening watching various thoroughbreds resist loading, yet here was the most valuable horse of the night following Harlan like a faithful shadow. As they approached the simple stock trailer attached to Harlan's weathered pickup, the young man couldn't contain his observation. The horse seemed to know Harlan somehow, as if they shared a history that explained this unlikely bond. Harlan paused, his weathered hand resting lightly on Midnight Dynasty's sleek neck. The stallion lowered his proud head, pressing gently against the rancher's shoulder in a gesture of unmistakable trust. Harlan explained that the horse didn't know him. They had never met before tonight, but animals, unlike people, saw beyond surfaces. The stallion recognized someone who saw him for what he truly was, not what he was worth. The difference mattered more than most people ever understood. With minimal guidance, Midnight Dynasty stepped willingly into the simple trailer, turning once to face outward before settling with a soft, nickering sound. Harlan secured the gate with practiced efficiency, his calloused hands moving through familiar motions that had remained unchanged through decades of working with horses worth millions and horses worth nothing but the care he gave them. As Harlan climbed into the driver's seat of his pickup, the engine rumbled to life, its steady sound a counterpoint to the expensive purr of luxury vehicles surrounding it. Headlights cut through the darkness as he pulled away from Thornhill Auction House, the trailer following like a period at the end of a sentence that had finally been completed after decades of waiting. Behind him, through the still open doors of the auction house, the wealthy elite of the horse breeding world watched his departure. Their expressions held the uncomfortable recognition of people confronting not just the misjudgment of one man, but the flawed values that had led to that misjudgment. Some would learn from this night, others would not. But none would forget the evening when an unwanted guest had become the auction's biggest shock, simply by being who he had always been. If you enjoyed this story about judgment, appearances, and the wisdom that comes from looking deeper, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories that will make you think. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.